Pharma was a depressed and exhausted doctor who ended up being transported to a fantasy world after losing his life due to overwork. In this new place, he gained magical abilities that he began to use to heal several people, while attracting the attention of several attractive women. When he opened his eyes, he came face to face with a young woman with pink hair, who was watching him intently and calling him Master Pharma. When he tried to sit up, he was hit by a severe headache, and the young woman begged him not to move, reminding her that he had been struck by lightning. When he tried to speak, he realized that his voice was that of a child, and no longer that of an overworked adult. And it was at this moment that he began to realize that something strange was happening. He noticed his small arms and hoped that this was all that had diminished, but he fell when he tried to get up. Even so, he dragged himself to the window, confirming that he was in a fantasy world. He soon saw his reflection in the mirror and was surprised, while his nanny questioned if the lightning had affected his brain. When he asked who Pharma was, she replied that her name was Pharma de Medicis. He found it curious that her name sounded like that of a pharmacist, and concluded that she had indeed lost her life from overwork, since he was visibly lost. The young woman decided to introduce herself again as Charlotte, or Lot, since he seemed to prefer it that way. When he asked for the bandages to be removed, she hurried off to make preparations. He noticed that some scribbles were written on her arm, but they disappeared when he rubbed them, which left him confused. While cleaning, Lot saw a mark on her arm and was amazed, saying that it was the sacred symbol of Panactheos. He tried to explain that it had appeared after the lightning, but she began to pray and thank the god. He thought she was talking about the god of chaos and fear, but she was frightened by this idea, saying that Panactheos was the god of medicine. He decided that it would be best to let her explain the basics of life in that house. She explained that his family came from an ancient aristocratic lineage, traditionally linked to royal pharmacy. His father was an archduke and president of the Imperial School of Pharmacy, which Pharma found fascinating. She showed him a portrait of his father, mother, younger sister Blanche, and older brother Pau, who was abroad studying medicine. Lot also mentioned that both Pharma and his brother were considered prodigies in pharmacy and the divine arts, explaining excitedly that these arts performed miracles through magic. Seeing that he seemed confused by the concept of magic, Lot became concerned that he had forgotten everything he had learned. She assured him that he was capable of using the divine arts of water. When he asked what would happen if he had truly forgotten everything, she replied that he would lose his noble title and be cast out like trash. Later, in his room, the fear of becoming homeless motivated him to try to regain his abilities. Based on Lot's vague instructions, he was able to clearly visualize the composition of the water, which made his life energy glow until streams of water emerged from his hands. Desperate at not being able to stop it, he ran to the window and stood, trying to control it. When he finally managed to stop the flow, he heard Lot calling from the garden, saying that he had watered her. She commented that the water was refreshing and pleasant, but he tried to ignore any misinterpretation. Back in his room, he marveled at his ability to conjure elements, but realized that he could not form mixtures. He also discovered that his left hand created substances, while his right hand dissolved them. When he heard Lot coming, he made everything disappear before she entered. Excited that he had remembered the divine arts, she then asked about his knowledge of medicine and warned him that his father used to give surprise tests during meals. She took him to the library, which had a large number of books that he recognized, but as he leafed through them, he realized that they contained human medical knowledge from centuries past. Dinner time arrived, and he sat at the table, attentive to the members of his family. They all asked about his recovery, and then acted like a typical magical family. During dinner, his father wanted to know how the georide balm used in his treatment had been made. Pharma explained the components and the process in detail, which pleased his father. His father commented that he was glad that the lightning had not made his son any dumber, and informed him that lessons with Eleanor would resume the next day. When the owner arrived, she quickly noticed that something was strange and commented that he no longer looked as adorable as before. Pharma, on the other hand, was more concerned about the fact that she seemed to have vision and perception problems. She asked him if he still remembered the divine arts. When he heard that he did, she decided to skip the pharmacology part and start by reviewing the fundamentals of the divine arts. She explained that each aristocrat had a patron deity and a divine art. In the case of her father and brother, it was Panactheos, while hers was Hydrotheos. She mentioned mentioned that there were 5 attributes of divine arts, divided into positive and negative. Pharma noticed that there was an attribute called none, and she explained that this referred to abilities outside the norm that had not been seen in over 300 years. When he asked which attribute would allow him to create any substance, she said that someone capable of doing so would be considered a god or a monster. Soon they went to the training room, where she scolded him for not bringing his wand. Eleanor explained that wands were used to amplify and control the divine arts, and it was then that he remembered a staff he had seen in his room. She lent him her wand and asked him to throw a water spear. When he couldn't, she demonstrated it, shouting the name of the attack as if she were in the middle of an anime. Pharma was impressed, took the wand and went to the lake. After mentally preparing himself, he performed a spell that came out completely disproportionate, forming something that looked like a water dragon until the wand fell from his hand. Eleanor said that he must have some defect. Wasting no time, she began to examine his body carefully since divine arts usually required enchantments. She suspected that the amount of his divine power had changed, so she brought out a measuring stick. When he held it, the meter filled and even cracked, showing a colorless capacity, revealing that he had both positive and negative attributes. Upon also seeing the mark of Panatheos, she warned him never to use such a meter in front of other people, not even in the presence of his father. The class ended, and they returned home. On the way, she had difficulty seeing. Pharma held her trembling hand and led her slowly. After a while, the mood became awkward, so he tried to lighten the mood by striking a funny pose and suggested that she do the same whenever she was without her glasses. She thought he was joking, but she tried it and realized she could see better. Pharma also tried the gesture, but noticed a glow in 2 spots. He held her hand, which was injured, and when she asked how he knew, he replied that medical conditions glowed blue and changed to white when he discovered the cause. This frightened her, since according to her, only the god Panatheos would have such divine powers. She then moved away from Pharma because she began to feel that he was not human. To make matters worse, she realized that he had no shadow, which made her scream as she begged for her life, promising that she would not tell anyone. Even when he tried to help her up, she ran away in fright. The next day, Pharma's father told her that Eleanor had a high fever and had decided to stop being her guardian. When asked why, Pharma knew that she could never admit that she had traumatized the woman with her superhuman abilities. Bruno, her father, then asked him to deliver a potion and a letter to Eleanor. However, Pharma realized that the potion was just an energy drink and decided to prescribe a real treatment for her. When he arrived at Eleanor's house, she appeared wearing full armor and asked if he had come there to silence her because he knew her secret. Pharma had to show her that he was not carrying a wand before she calmed down and took off her helmet to listen to him. He explained that Bruno had asked him to deliver a letter and a potion, but Eleanor found it strange since she could prepare her own potion herself. Therefore, she suspected that it was poison. Pharma also gave him a recipe and a balm for her finger, but Eleanor, still scared, thought that everything was poisoned. Pharma then sincerely asked her to listen to him, because he wanted her to be his guardian again. Eleanor said that there was no need, since he was the reincarnation of Panatheos. Pharma ignored it, but Eleanor knelt down as if she were his servant, saying that she would keep the secret and begging again for her life. Pharma told her that he needed her in his life, which she misunderstood. He had to clarify that he needed her knowledge, not her body. He explained that she was the only person capable of helping him control his powers, since there were no books on divine arts in the family library. He also said that he would not force her to accept the request, and then brought her a bouquet of flowers as a thank you for her services. He gave her the flowers before leaving, telling her that she should try to forget him. Later, Eliana realized that she could not use the medicines he left, as they were in powder form, and the advancement of medicine in that world did not yet allow for this type of use. She then reflected that Panatheos was a peaceful god, and decided to adopt a more positive attitude. The next day, she found Pharma again, still wearing the armor as a precaution in case he tried to attack her. She informed him that she would return to teaching, but only because she could be held responsible if he lost control of his powers. She also thanked him for the white powders he had prepared, saying that they worked faster than Bruno's potions. To begin their training, they went to an uninhabited island for safety and spent the entire day there, training. Back at the castle, Pharma began to practice using the divine eye with the servants of the house. Thus, he learned that the light disappeared when the treatment was definitive, but only weakened if it was something only manageable. He also used the eye on Lot, as he intended to become someone indispensable, in case the truth about him was discovered, and they decided to persecute those who stood out too much. He began to prepare specific treatments for each problem, and his special abilities allowed him to create substances that were difficult to obtain at the time. He became so involved in his work that he forgot everything around him, as he had done in his previous life, until he finished a medicine for Lot's eczema. When he delivered it, Lot was so excited that he wanted to share it with everyone. But Pharma explained that medicines should not be shared. Then he went out to personally deliver a medicine to each employee. When he asked Lot why the washerwoman had cried when she received her gift, she explained that employees never received anything from their noble masters, so this was something new. Besides, noble pharmacists were not supposed to take care of commoners. This left Pharma torn, as he felt that it was not so different from the real world. Still, he thought it was wrong and wanted to change the situation by creating affordable medicines. The next morning, during lunch, the room was quiet and everyone had worried faces. Bruno informed him that Blanche had chickenpox. This bothered Pharma, who knew that the illness was not the result of some exotic chicken dish, but rather a viral infection. He wondered why a fantasy world would have chickenpox, but he figured Blanche would have a chance of recovering since she was still so young. Bruno ordered everyone to stay away from her for 3 weeks to avoid contagion. However, Pharma was an exception, as she had already contracted the disease and was probably immune. When he saw Bruno coughing, Pharma became alert but said nothing. He immediately went to the laboratory to prepare a medicine for chickenpox. The substance needed was difficult to conjure, and the process took a while to work. He went to Blanche's room, who was visibly ill, with spots all over her face. She asked him to leave, but he said he had brought some medicine. Blanche protested, because she hated bitter medicine, like any child. So Pharma mixed the powder into macarons and made her eat them. However, she remembered that Bruno had said there was no cure for chickenpox. Pharma said he found the cure in a book in the library, but Blanche countered by saying there was no way there was a book there that Bruno didn't know about. Realizing she was right, Pharma replied that it would be their secret, which convinced her not to insist any further. He also noticed that she was itching and asked her to avoid spreading the virus, even though in that world, the concept of viruses did not exist. Blanche wanted to learn more about him, so Pharma compared the virus to a ghost, which frightened her. While tending to her, Blanche commented on how much kinder he had become and said that this made her love him even more. This reminded him of his sister in his previous life. A few days later, Bruno was surprised to see that Blanche had already recovered. When he asked her what had happened, she said it was a secret. Later, in the lab, Pharma concluded that he was abnormal, even for someone who looked cold. He could create substances out of thin air, functioned like a walking MRI machine, and his eyes could magnify images. To top it all off, he had no shadow, which was strange. He eventually invented a simple microscope, and while praising his own genius, he was called by a butler to Bruno's office. Upon arriving there, Bruno asked Pharma to pack his things, as they would be taken immediately to the Empress. Meanwhile, Bruno's cough was getting worse, and he explained that the Empress's condition had suddenly deteriorated. Pharma tried to use her divine eye, but she couldn't. When she asked what was wrong with the Empress, Bruno replied that it was a secret, and insisted that he prepare himself. In the castle, the head of the palace physician, Claudie, was pacing back and forth. While Bruno entered with Pharma, all the aristocrats were gathered in the hall, as if it were a wake. Bruno and Pharma went to greet the Empress. She revealed herself to be young, and her name was Queen Elizabeth Roman II. While Bruno carried out his duties, Pharma acted as his assistant, keeping to the side. Pharma watched Bruno take a blood sample from the Empress and use magic to examine her before meeting with the other doctors to discuss the case. He heard comments about stars and how her life was coming to an end. Even so, Bruno prepared some anesthetic potions to make her so numb that she would no longer feel pain. The Empress even asked him to tell her the truth about her condition, but Bruno insisted that she still had a chance of survival before administering the numbing. From everyone's attitudes, Pharma could tell that they had given up on her, and this made him angry. He then used his divine eye to examine her and discovered that she suffered from lung cancer, tuberculosis, and other serious illnesses. He thought about how the compound needed to treat her was so complex that it might be impossible to create it perfectly through conjuration. At that moment, the prince came in desperately, begging for his mother to get better. The boy's presence only made the situation worse, since everyone was powerless in the face of the situation. Pharma then gathered up his courage carriage and stepped forward. When he said he wanted to try treating her with a new medicine, Bruno tried to stop him so that he would not embarrass the family. However, the Empress interrupted him, saying that she trusted him because of his divine art and, therefore, authorized the treatment. Immediately, Pharma locked himself in the laboratory and wrote down the formula for 4 medicines that should be used together. He began to conjure them one by one with just the power of his mind. Bruno entered the laboratory aggressively and ordered him to stop this madness, but Pharma refused. Bruno argued that tuberculosis had no cure, which surprised Pharma, who realized that his father was capable of making accurate diagnoses without any special powers. Even so, Bruno thought his son was lying and would end up giving false hope to the Empress. Pharma replied that he should take the medicine himself and went back to work. In response, Bruno attacked him from behind, trying to stop him by force. Pharma resisted and blocked the second attack, creating a thick wall of ice that divided the laboratory in half. Bruno realized that Pharma did not use a wand or an incantation and asked who he really was. Pharma remained silent. When Bruno saw the notebook with the medicine formulas, Pharma pretended that he had dreamed about it when the lightning struck him. Bruno then saw the sacred mark and decided to attribute everything to Panactheo's blessing. Being visibly pleased, Pharma asked his father to take credit for creating the formula to boost his political career, but Bruno refused, stating that he should take responsibility for his words and live up to the Empress's expectations. In view of this, Pharma undid the ice wall, which surprised Bruno even more, who noticed a huge difference between the son he knew and the young man before him. Bruno even questioned if he was really his son. Pharma simply replied that he considered him as a father. After that, he returned to the others, covering his face as if he were a discreet surgeon. When he presented the medicine to the Empress, Claude asked Bruno to stop his insane son, but Bruno replied that Pharma might have already outgrown them. Pharma then used a microscope to show the Empress tiny creatures dancing inside her lungs. The Empress told Claude to look too, and everyone in the hall took turns observing the new discovery. Pharma explained that these organisms were called bacteria and that most diseases were caused by microorganisms. After the explanation, he said that he would need to observe her every day for 6 months and even put his life on the line as a guarantee. He then drank his own dose of the medicine, and soon after, the Empress took it too. He then declared with conviction that tuberculosis would no longer be an incurable disease. During the ride home, the silence in the carriage left Bruno thoughtful. He remembered when Pharma was little and how he had always treated him only as a future doctor, without caring about his normal life, until the moment when the gods struck him with lightning. Even though they had not been close in the past, Bruno knew that the young man in front of him was not the same son he had been before. As they got out of the carriage, Pharma handed him the same medicine and Bruno accepted it, saying that he would do it at Panactheos's will. Pharma then admitted that he did not know what it meant to be a true pharmacist and that he had simply been given a special skill. So he asked Bruno to guide him for as long as he could, and the two shook hands like true knights. 3 months passed, and Pharma and Bruno began to have a closer relationship as pharmacists, exchanging ideas and learning as equals. Bruno said that a famous doctor had asked about a cure for tuberculosis, but Pharma explained that, for now, only he could produce it. Bruno replied that he had already dismissed the doctor, saying that the cure was the work of Panactheos and his divine arts. Pharma had to interrupt him to say that he planned to make the recipe available in the future, once he could produce it without using magic. Bruno believed that Pharma acted guided by Panactheos' will and decided to accept, as this had always been his weak point. Bruno warned that Pharma's methods could seem heretical, and that doing so would put his life at risk, both among pharmacists and nobles. He also said that there were suspicions that the Empress might have been infected on purpose. Pharma, however, found this hypothesis unlikely, since the infection rate after exposure was only 10%. Once again, Bruno treated his words as divine knowledge and withdrew, wanting to keep his distance. Before leaving, Bruno looked at Pharma's detailed analysis and was reminded of a heretic who had nearly gone mad because of his research. At the castle, Pharma met Lord Noah, who took him aside and revealed that the Empress planned to reward him for saving her life. When Noah asked if there was anything he wanted, Pharma replied that he was satisfied, but Noah insisted, saying that he was now an important figure. Noah offered money or even a harem of girls with cat ears, but Pharma was at a loss for what to say. After much insistence, Pharma said that he would like to open his own pharmacy, accessible to all social classes. Noah was surprised, since he had refused something comparable to a blank check. In the Empress's chambers, she said that the medicine was working, and that her recovery was evident. Pharma warned her not to trust too much in miracle drugs, as complications could still arise. She understood that he simply wanted her to be careful, and joked about his boasting about his cure to the best doctors in the kingdom. She then explained that everyone was already planning his funeral after his collapse, and that her authority as ruler had been ignored. She felt that she did not deserve to return to the throne after feeling useless for so long. Pharma disagreed, reminding her that her son, Louis, still needed his mother, as did the entire kingdom. Somehow, he managed to convince her to believe in herself again. As she left, Pharma commented that both he and she had been close to death, and so they should try to live a more meaningful life. A few months later, the Empress, now fully recovered, summoned Bruno and wrote him a letter. The next day, Bruno had Pharma accompany him, dressed appropriately as a nobleman. Pharma thought that he did not look like such a suit, but was reminded that he was the son of an archduke. In the royal hall, the queen was introduced and summoned Bruno to grant him a new territory, rich in medicinal herbs. Pharma was then summoned, but he thought it was a mistake. He then got down on his knees and was promoted from apprentice to official royal physician. While Pharma was still confused by everything, Bruno had to bring him back to reality. He was given an official pin to mark his position, and the Empress also granted him permission to open a pharmacy in the royal capital. That afternoon, a group of engineers showed up at his house to ask for the specifications of the pharmacy he wanted to build. Although he said it wasn't ready yet, they claimed that they had to start immediately or they would be held responsible. Fortunately, Eleanor showed up to help, and this made Pharma realize that he had no choice. He then drew up a design he already had in mind. After a few months, the building was completed, and the chief engineer asked what name should be on the plaque. They began to think of appropriate names, but the engineer heard Pharma talking to himself and decided to adopt the name Pharmacy of the Other World. When the construction was finished, Eleanor thought it was all beautiful, although Pharma said that it was all the result of a misunderstanding. She also commented that a bland name would not stop the Pharmacists' union from creating problems. While they were talking, a constipated shopkeeper came in and asked who owned the place. When Pharma introduced himself, the man revealed himself to be Varen, the head of the Pharmacists' union, and insinuated that, given Pharma's age, he probably sold sweets. Pharma remained calm and responded to the provocations calmly. When Varen asked if the prices would be high, Pharma said that he intended to sell affordable medicines, which angered Varen. Eleanor then intervened and insulted him until he left the place. When they did a final check of the pharmacy, Pharma realized that there was no one in charge of the finances. Lot offered to take over the job, but Pharma was suspicious because she was only a child. When he refused, Lot began to cry and begged for help. He then promised to put her in charge of the deliveries, which she happily accepted. Later, when Pharma got home, she noticed that everyone was emotional. Cedric explained that he had been asked to retire, although it seemed odd, since Cedric had always been good at managing the estate's finances. He said that the Lord was probably worried about his weak knee. Pharma promised to treat the problem, as long as Cedric would work at his pharmacy, and they both agreed to the new arrangement. He then spoke to Bruno, who told him that he could do whatever he wanted, since he had fired Cedric. Bruno also gave him a chest full of gold to start the business, saying that he wanted to do something great for his son. Pharma realized that Bruno had done this intentionally to make Cedric available, although no one brought it up directly. Still, he thanked everyone for their consideration. Weeks passed, but the pharmacy remained empty. Pharma thought about how to improve the situation, and Eleanor explained that it was normal, since the commoners preferred local pharmacies, while the nobles called the pharmacists at home. People seemed curious, but no one wanted to be the first to enter. During a meeting with the staff, Pharma expressed that his main interest was to help the commoners, but everyone was treating the pharmacy as if it were a psychiatric hospital. At that moment, Lot appeared with some papers that he called a research, conducted with 100 residents of the city. She began reading the contents as if it were a formal report, receiving applause from everyone. Half of the people interviewed said that the royal seal at the entrance frightened them. Others said that they did not know how to behave in front of nobles and preferred to stay away for fear of being punished for something trivial. Some commented that the knights at the entrance were intimidating, and others doubted the ability of a child to run the place. These seemed like simple problems that could be solved with time and reputation. So the team decided to update the prices in the window to attract more customers. That afternoon, Mr. Jean came into the store to buy sweets and took the opportunity to drink the mineral water available. The team was happy with his visit and wished that more people would come like him. Pharma asked if Jean was a sailor and tried to sell him vitamin C candies to prevent scurvy, but Jean quickly found an excuse to leave. When Pharma followed him to the door, he saw Jean talking to some merchants and, upon closer inspection, realized that two street performers were actually his parents in disguise. Inside the store, his mother said something unusual, but he ignored her and demanded to know why they were hiding. She replied that she just wanted to see how he was doing, and Bruno asked to take a tour of the pharmacy. Pharma began by showing him the first floor, which had a display case of products, a laboratory, and a waiting room. The second floor housed an examination room and a space for patients to rest. The third floor was dedicated to the basic tasks of the employees and had a kitchen. The top floor was Pharma's personal laboratory, where he developed new medicines. After the tour, Bruno asked about the customer traffic, saying that he saw several nobles but no commoners. Pharma sadly replied that he had not yet managed to attract the commoners. His mother then suggested that he add cosmetics to the product line, as this could be a success and attract commoners, since many were looking to improve their appearance. Pharma reflected on the fact that he had never worked with cosmetics in his previous life, but decided to give it a try. He asked her what she recommended, and she suggested a skincare product with fragrance. Bruno intervened and asked that no white powder be produced. This caused his wife to complain, as she had been avoiding using this powder at his request. Bruno explained that, in his experience, women who used this type of dye quickly became ill. Pharma was shocked by this observation, since the white powder in question was made with lead and mercury chloride, two heavy metals that are toxic when absorbed by the body. Bruno also added that there were women in the city who even resorted to bloodletting to achieve pale skin. This was completely nonsensical, and to prevent his wife from doing the same, he claimed that she was more beautiful than anyone else, which made her blush. At that moment, a man rushed in asking for help, saying that his wife had fainted and was in critical condition. Pharma went with him to the place, where they almost didn't let him pass until they saw his royal badge. Inside the carriage, Pharma found a very pale young woman. Upon examining her with his eyes, he found no specific illness, only several cuts on her wrists that indicated bloodletting by a professional. He explained that she was anemic because she had had the blood drained from her body. She replied that the procedure had been performed by someone qualified. Pharma pointed out that the cuts were infected and that she needed urgent treatment. At the pharmacy, the young woman explained that she had been rejected by her love interest for not being pale enough, so she tried to change her appearance to be accepted. Even after nearly dying, she still wanted to become a doll to win his affection. Pharma prescribed medication and asked her to stop using the white powder, but she refused, saying that she needed to be desired or her family would consider her useless. Lot asked Pharma to help the girl, so he thought of an alternative and asked her to come back in a week. A few days later, Pharma tested a prototype on himself, which made him look exaggerated. However, the girls seemed to like it. Eleanor worried about the safety of the product, but Pharma reassured her, saying that, unlike mercury, its formula was made with safe ingredients. She suggested that a ban be imposed on the use of the white powder, and Pharma said he already planned to speak to the Empress about it. The following week, the pale young woman returned to collect her cosmetics. Pharma demonstrated how to apply sunscreen and moisturizers properly, calmly and carefully, while she watched closely. Eleanor finished applying the cosmetics, and the young woman confessed that she had gone from looking dull to someone almost unrecognizable. She cried with joy as she thanked Pharma for saving her from ugliness and anemia. The next day, Lot went to the market to promote the new product to other insecure women who immediately showed interest. Even an elderly woman wanted to try it, but said she couldn't read. Lot then gave her a visual manual aimed at those who couldn't interpret texts. Soon, the pharmacy began to prosper, which showed that people cared more about their appearance than their health. However, a new complaint soon arose. Chloe's appearance was once again poor, as the new shipment had sold out before she could buy it. Pharma apologized and explained that she didn't have enough staff to meet the demand of a city full of insecure people. To solve the problem, Chloe proposed that Pharma set up a subsidiary with her family, including offering financing and labor. Pharma looked at Cedric, who said it was a good deal, and he accepted the proposal. Within a week, Chloe had established a cosmetics branch and hired more employees who would work enthusiastically in exchange for a lifetime supply of the products that masked her insecurities. A few weeks passed, and Lot showed up to present the results of his new research to the team. This time, the reports were much more positive across the board, and everyone celebrated the fact that they had overcome the initial obstacles. A few days later, Pharma's family took a vacation to visit the new territory that the Empress had granted Bruno some time ago. Once at the mansion, Bruno praised the local administrator for his good management and asked for a full report on his activities, which began immediately. The city was known for being an important port that connected the empire to other nations, and also for being one of the largest producers of medicinal herbs. Soon the adults began to talk about complicated subjects, such as tax evasion, and Bruno, realizing that Pharma was out of place, told him to go play in the sea. Pharma then joined Lot and Blanche, who had built a sandcastle. Blanche wanted to get into the water, but he reminded everyone that they couldn't swim, which left the three frustrated. However, after listening to the girls' persistent pleas, Pharma gave in to their request. As they approached the sea, Pharma noticed Eliana resting under a tree. However, she stood up saying that she wanted to swim too. Eliana then took off her belt and started playing, which made Pharma wish that this would not become an awkward situation. When Eliana asked if he would join in, a simple look at Blanche took away all of Pharma's excitement, as she reminded him of his sister from another life. He remembered the times when he would play with his sister on the beach, and how she wanted to grow up quickly. However, she had died early. While he was immersed in the memories, he heard screams, as Blanche had been swept away by the current. Pharma dove in without hesitation, even though the current was pulling Eliana back. Blanche was being carried away with great force and began to drown. When he saw her sinking, he shouted her name so loudly that his emblem emitted a bright light that opened up a space in the sea, creating a dry area in the ocean. Eliana woke up to see Pharma holding back the waters as he slowly walked back to shore. She could only watch in amazement. When everything calmed down, Eliana wanted to know what he had done, and Pharma replied that perhaps it was his divine art of negative water. Eliana disagreed, as that kind of ability could not nullify the water in that way down to the sand at the bottom. Pharma noticed Lot was scared and was about to blame himself, but Eliana told him that he was amazing for being able to save Blanche by himself. That night, Pharma reflected on how he had literally eliminated the salt from the bottom of the sea, which meant that he had fortunately not hurt Blanche or Eliana. He also realized that Lot was trying to hide his fear of him. When she tried to start a conversation, he quickly assured her that he would not use his powers in that way anymore, and that she did not need to be afraid. However, Lot said that she was not scared, but rather impressed by what she saw. She apologized for not rushing to save Blanche, since that was her responsibility, but Pharma replied that it was natural, since she could not swim. When she said that she considered her part of the family, Lot was moved and left crying with joy. Later that night, news reached the church that a boy had erased part of the sea in a port city. The information had come from a child in an orphanage, which had caused the group to almost ignore the story until the priest mentioned that they had found traces of divine energy at the site days later. Upon hearing this, the leader ordered them to locate the shadowless boy, who was to be eliminated as a heretic. In the capital, business at the pharmacy was even busier than before, and Eliana joked that Pharma should be careful not to die of exhaustion. Pharma also noticed some suspicious priests muttering in a corner and approached them to ask what they wanted, but received only threatening looks before they left. That afternoon, the staff commented on the strange men. Lot said they had not bought anything, and Eliana remarked that their attire looked foreign. Lot suggested that they warn the guards to be on the lookout. That night, the pharmacy knights were changing shifts when a loaded wagon burst through the gates. Upon hearing the news, Bruno was furious and promised to capture those responsible. After ordering the knight to return to his post, Pharma prepared to go to the pharmacy, but Bruno stopped him and asked if he had any suspects in mind. Pharma thought about Veron and the men in robes, but decided that it would be best not to act on impulse. Bruno advised him to remain alert. When Pharma arrived at the scene, Cedric explained that no one had been hurt, but the cart loaded with sediment had caused damage to the facade and the goods on display. Cedric then used a simple divine art to eliminate the stench. Later, Cedric revealed that they had moved the important medicines to the cosmetics next branch, where they would continue to operate until everything was restored. During the conversation, old Jean appeared with a group of helpers to help with the cleanup. The townspeople also supported Pharma, offering help in every way they could. Some time later, a young woman entered the pharmacy with a worried expression and looked for Pharma. When he asked what had happened, she said that her father had fainted from the heat and would not wake up. Although he didn't want to leave, everyone insisted that he go and help. Pharma then mounted a horse with the young woman and set off for a remote area. Along the way, he thought about how to treat a case of dehydration, but before he knew it, the young woman disappeared, and he found himself surrounded by men dressed in white. The leader of the group asked if he was responsible for erasing part of the sea and revealed that they were all inquisitors of the Sacred Kingdom. This reminded him of Eleanor's explanations about the importance of the temple, which trained children to use divine arts and also granted noble titles. She said that the temple chose the rulers of each nation, thus occupying the top of the hierarchy of power. One of the most feared branches of the institution was the inquisitors, whose mission was to eliminate evil spirits and heretics. Pharma recalled that Eleanor described them as a group of unstable elites. When the leader introduced himself as Solomon of the Great Temple, Pharma assumed a serious posture. They accused him of being an evil spirit and asked him to retreat, which he reluctantly did, allowing them to cast a spell to immobilize him. However, it only took a small effort for him to break the spell. The mounted men then surrounded him, and one of them attacked him with fire. Pharma created a shield to protect himself and removed the oxygen around him to put out the flames. Another enemy attacked with ice swords, but he also managed to defend himself. When he tried to calmly talk to them, Solomon gave the order for everyone to eliminate him at once. Pharma panicked as the enemies advanced from all sides with coordinated attacks. The attacks raised a large cloud of dust, which soon dissipated, revealing that Pharma had protected himself with a wall of ice. He then created a huge block of ice while his body glowed brightly. He asked them to cease their attacks, saying that he would rather use his powers to heal than to fight. Solomon then noticed the mark of Panektheos on Pharma and, in view of the deeds he had performed, declared that Pharma was the god Panektheos himself. Pharma did not understand what this meant, but Solomon continued, stating that he had already received divine punishment, as he had suffered a serious injury when he fell from his horse. Solomon knelt down and offered his life as a way of asking for forgiveness. As he prepared to take his own life, Pharma stopped him at the last moment. Pharma examined Solomon's leg and concluded that it would have to be amputated. However, since the leg glowed red, he opted for a reduction treatment, and the glow disappeared, indicating that his decision was correct. The next problem was finding someone capable of performing the operation. Since Pharma was a pharmacist, after considering all the possibilities, he decided that he would have to perform the operation himself. Pharma then conjured a stone bed out of thin air and had the priests set up a tent. When everything was ready, he entered the tent and explained the procedure he was going to perform. After receiving the patient's permission, he dressed himself properly and applied anesthesia to Solomon's spinal cord. After the procedure was completed, the group that had previously attacked him began to treat him like a god. Pharma, however, asked for only one thing: that everything they had seen be kept secret. Months passed until Solomon, now promoted to bishop, visited Pharma's pharmacy bearing sweets, as if he were celebrating some holiday. Pharma questioned how someone who led a group of persecutors had become a bishop. Solomon explained that he had gone through many trials to become useful to Pharma, and that he would now dedicate his life to protecting his secret. This devotion made Pharma a little uncomfortable. Pharma also noticed several boys parading around the pharmacy, and Solomon took him to a room to present a sacred wand, known as the treasure of the temple of the guardian god. Solomon explained that the wand possessed all attributes, including healing, and that it could change shape. Pharma felt that he was not worthy of holding such a sacred artifact, but Solomon insisted. When Pharma touched the wand, it glowed brightly, impressing everyone present, including Eleanor. Pharma tried to hand the wand to Eleanor, but it went through his hand. Solomon then explained that the artifact was from another world and that only divine beings from outside that world could hold it. When he picked it up again, Pharma asked if the wand could float. Solomon replied that there were ancient records suggesting that it could. Pharma tested it, and the wand did indeed float, leaving Solomon and Eleanor excited. Before leaving, Solomon promised that the temple would not bother him anymore, but made it clear that the incident with the cart was not their doing, and that Pharma still had enemies. He also gave Pharma a talisman to suppress his divine powers. When Pharma used the talisman, his shadow returned, which made him happier than when he had received his own wand. Later, he walked around the city with Blanche and Lot. As he walked, walked, he thought about how difficult it would be to hire more employees. It was then that he overheard a customer asking a pharmacy clerk why they didn't sell Pharma's products. The man replied that the store sold strange drugs at very low prices, which caused suspicion. The store owner appeared and explained that Pharma's products needed union approval to be sold. Back at his pharmacy, Pharma came up with the idea of forming a new union since Varen continued to be an obstacle. He hoped for the best, as he didn't want to overwork himself again, although Eleanor found the idea amusing. Meanwhile, at the Pharmacists' Union, the members discussed ways to sabotage Pharma after he had survived the attack. Varen believed that Pharma had only been able to restore the pharmacy because of his divine powers or his father's money. When he saw that the others were laughing, he reminded him that Pharma was hurting business, so they should stand up to him. He forbade all union members from going near the pharmacy, under penalty of losing their licenses. Later, a man knocked on a doctor's door in despair, carrying his sick daughter. Luckily, Pharma was passing by and offered to help. The man, being a union member, hesitated, but changed his mind and went with Pharma to the pharmacy. When they entered through a side entrance, the man thought it was the entrance reserved for commoners. Once inside, Pharma handed him a mask, making the man realize that Pharma was protecting his customers from the spread of the disease. Pharma began asking basic questions, such as his daughter's name and age, what she had eaten, among other details that surprised the father. Since the girl was unconscious, Pharma took her body measurements. When the man asked why, Pharma explained that he needed this data to calculate the correct dosage of the medicine. After that, he used his divine eye to examine her, which aroused even more curiosity. Pharma then explained that the girl, named Marie, just had a bad cold. The local pharmacist was skeptical, having noticed several symptoms, but Pharma said it was a cold caused by a virus. The girl's father did not understand many of the terms Pharma used, but he understood that the medicine was to be administered by inhalation, not orally. After that, Pharma let them rest. By the evening, Marie's health had improved considerably. When he walked them home, Pharma promised to come back to see her if her symptoms worsened. At the gate, the father expected a very large bill, but was surprised to learn that it was the equivalent of a large loaf of bread. At home, the man's wife was concerned when she heard that he had visited Pharma's pharmacy, but he said he had no other choice. He then went on to praise Pharma, saying that he genuinely cared about Marie. He confessed that as a pharmacist, learning something from Pharma could help him a lot, but that it would mean confronting the union. His wife remembered the debts they had incurred at the pharmacy, but realized that he had already made up his mind and began to cry. At the next union meeting, Varen said that he had destroyed all the cosmetics his wife had bought from Pharma. Others whispered that even the bishop frequented the pharmacy. Varen then asked Pierre what he thought of the situation. Since his store was closer to the pharmacy, Pierre took a deep breath and answered firmly, asking if anyone present had ever seen the medicines that Pharma produced. No one responded positively. Pierre said that they needed to see for themselves. As he had done, he said that he had sought help there and that everyone had been treated equally and the prices were affordable. Varen was furious and tried to find excuses to call Pharma a demon. He said that a nobleman had ignored him in a time of need and that, because his divine powers were limited, he had had to bury his own son. Varen insisted that Pharma needed to be eliminated by all means, but Pierre tried to convince the others to learn from the new competitor, instead of relying on luck and outdated knowledge. He was being convincing, until Varen silenced him and threw him out of the meeting. That afternoon, Pharma found Pierre sitting in front of his vandalized shop. Pierre told him that he had confronted the union and had been punished as a result. He said that he would have to leave the country if he wanted to continue practicing his profession. Pharma replied that that would not be necessary, as he had just founded a new union. He invited Pierre to join him, which thrilled the man. Pierre reopened his shop with some of Pharma's products. As he prepared for the opening, Marie encouraged him, and he was surprised to find a line of customers waiting outside. Years earlier, a genius named Camus had been imprisoned by the temple, despite having contributed significantly to the kingdom's medical advancement. In his final moments, young Bruno wanted to understand why he had performed human experiments. Camus replied that it was all part of the cycle of life, in which people die and are born every day. As he tried to explain the importance of the experiments, Bruno woke up from a nightmare. During lunch, Pharma noticed that he seemed disturbed and asked what had happened. However, Bruno chose not to mention Camus that morning. At that moment, a letter from Powell, his eldest son, was delivered. Bruno read the message informing him that Powell's visit to the family home would be postponed, which worried his mother, as she had been eagerly awaiting his arrival. Lot and Blanche began to talk about what a genius Powell was, and said that it was obvious that Pharma was also incredible. Soon after, Pharma and Bruno went to the office, where Bruno reminded Pharma about the St. Flu Fair, a month-long event that brought together merchants from all over the world in the capital. Bruno warned Pharma to be careful, as there had been reports of a strange epidemic that had broken out on an island in a neighboring country. According to him, Powell's letter described that over 1,000 colonists had died. This worried Pharma, and he wanted to know more details, but Bruno added that even the research team that collected samples had died recently, which confirmed that the disease was contagious. Bruno revealed that, although the epidemic had been contained, products from the island would be sent to the fair with the risk of being contaminated. To make matters worse, the goods would be unloaded at the port of Bruno's new jurisdiction. The fact that all information about the epidemic had been destroyed frightened Pharma, as it indicated that the situation was out of control. In Powell's report, the first researcher had a high fever, followed by vomiting and headaches, and developed swelling in his neck before dying on the 7th day. The second researcher died more quickly, with different symptoms, including darkening of the skin. At this point, everyone understood the gravity of the situation. Pharma asked for more details, and Bruno read about a new device created by an unidentified person, who was actually Pharma and his microscope. Pharma learned that the researchers had used his microscope and managed to observe the virus, so he asked Powell to send him the notes of the discovery. Meanwhile, at the palace, a meeting was held where it was reported that the mortality rate in the kingdom had decreased by more than 20% since the founding of Pharma's pharmacy. Everyone recognized his positive influence on the kingdom, and the Empress suggested rewarding him. She considered naming him Archduke, but Mary reminded him that this title could not be granted to minors. During the meeting, the Empress also considered the possibility that Pharma was possessed by some entity and wanted to help him act freely. At the pharmacy, Pharma explained to Eleanor about the fatal disease. She suggested canceling the fair. Lot showed up with a letter from Powell, and upon seeing the enclosed drawings, Pharma was shocked. He recognized that it was the bacterium Yersinia pestis. Pharma immediately sent personnel to the port to initiate a quarantine, and they promised to act quickly. Pharma and Eleanor then sought out Bruno and told him that the epidemic was probably the Black Death. Bruno had already suspected this after some reading. Pharma recalled that the bubonic plague had a mortality rate of about 70% in the 17th century. They explained the preventive measures they had taken. Even so, Bruno stressed that the empire would be doomed if there were an outbreak. Since there was no definitive cure, Pharma revealed that he had developed a new medicine and sent it to be packaged, just in case. Although Bruno was impressed with the speed, Pharma said it was still essential to prevent an outbreak, as he was the only one capable of producing the drug. In response, they requested that the Empress inspect the goods at the capital gate. In addition, Pharma requested that the vectors of the disease, such as fleas and rats, be eliminated. The Empress immediately took action to comply with the request. Bruno thanked her for her prompt action, but she replied that she trusted Pharma completely. That same day, Pharma showed Pierre the compound microscope he had constructed, explaining that it would prevent direct contact with the bacteria. He also informed him that the medicine had already been packaged and would be distributed free of charge as needed. After the preparations were made, Pharma left the capital under Pierre's care. At the same time, the Empress received information about the preparations for the fair, which were proceeding according to plan, and the inspection points were not causing any delays. Bishop Salomon had also sent priests in case purification was needed. The Empress requested that the matter of the epidemic be kept secret to prevent enemies from using the situation to cause chaos. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Pharma were preparing to set sail, and when she noticed that he was frightened, she tried to encourage him, pointing out that Lot was rooting for him. When they arrived at the port city, they observed the ships awaiting inspection, and wondered how just one contaminated ship could destroy the prosperity of the empire. They met up with a team that had been sent earlier, who informed them that all the ships were now docked and handed over the inspection documents. Even the ships that had passed the inspection had their cargoes purified as a precaution. Pharma and Eleanor joined the inspection team and boarded a ship with an impatient merchant. They spoke to the ship's doctor, who cooperated with the inspection. After examining the cargo, Pharma found no irregularities in the cargo, but prescribed medication for the crew, who were suffering from scurvy. As they set off for the next ship, the sailors began arguing about how to speed up their inspections. The commotion grew louder, and Eleanor drew her wand, but the group calmed down when they heard powered cannon fire from the Imperial Scarlet Navy. It was revealed that old Jean was a naval commander. He announced that Pharma was a royal pharmacist and the son of an archduke, which surprised the sailors. Jean threatened to sink any ship that disrespected Pharma. Pharma's crew found Jean again, who in reality just wanted more candy from the store. The crew reported that since they had started eating the pharmacy's candy, they had not suffered from scurvy. Pharma was happy to learn that the product was helping. Even after the inspections, Eliana remained concerned about a possible outbreak of the Black Death. She urged everyone to remain vigilant. Just then, Adam, the acting governor, arrived with a report that several residents of the village of Estac had died after suffering from high fevers. The village was to the west, and some sailors had apparently escaped inspection and fled there. The disease was spreading rapidly. Pharma prepared to go to the location, despite Eliana's disapproval, and explained the gravity of the situation. Eliana tried to stop him, but he told her that she should act instead of complaining. As she had the personnel and equipment, Pharma activated her divine wand and flew away immediately. During the flight, he lost his thoughts and ended up colliding with a bird, which almost made him fall, but he managed to stabilize himself. When he almost crashed into a tree, he closed his eyes, but passed through the trunk thanks to the ability of the wand. When he arrived at the village, he saw several villagers leaving the place. He asked them to stay, but they refused. As they were all afraid of dying, they soon began to panic and called him an evil spirit, since he appeared out of nowhere. When the villagers drew weapons, Pharma used the wand to create a dome of ice around the village. Everyone was surprised. He explained that he was there to save them as a royal pharmacist, and when they saw his brooch, their spirits calmed down and they asked for help. Pharma then explained that the village would be divided into 3 zones: for the seriously infected, for the slightly infected, and for the uninfected. Some men thought he intended to eliminate the sick, but he explained that it was just a way of prioritizing those who needed it most. Back at the port, the Navy spotted a strange ship approaching. After analysis, they concluded that it was probably the vessel that had escaped inspection. The ship was flying flags for help, which indicated contamination. When they got closer, a young observer reported that everyone on board was dead. Commander Jean considered it futile to board the ship and ordered the cannons to be prepared to sink it, along with the contaminants. As they prepared, Jean remembered that Pharma wanted to save everyone, but that ship ignored the inspection. Jean then said a prayer before ordering the firing. Elsewhere, a group of men were discussing the need for help with the work. When a woman offered, they declined after looking at her. She was Professor Black Mold, who was about to retire. In her office, her assistant called her Casper, but she replied that, in addition to being old, her expertise in fungi and microorganisms was no longer of value in today's medicine. As she accepted her apparent professional end, she was called to appear in the president's office. Meanwhile, in Estac, Pharma entered the first isolation building. When Pharma opened the door, the men asked what a child was doing there. However, another man interrupted the hostility by recognizing Pharma and stating that he had been with Salomon recently, so he knew Pharma was Panictheos. After clarifying who was in charge, they reported that they could not tell who was infected and who was not. Pharma then instructed that everyone present be given medication while he examined the patients one by one. He used his divine eye to diagnose them individually and observed that treatment was possible when the light disappeared. He informed one lucky man that he only had a cold and was therefore free to leave the isolation center. Pharma even used his wand to speed up the healing process. It was clear, however, that he could not handle the situation alone, especially with the contaminated cargo still on its way to the capital. After administering the medicine, the men asked Pharma what the next step would be, and he said that they should leave immediately and intercept the contaminated shipments before they reached the capital. At the port, Eleanor and her team had finished their rounds of inspection, but she still warned her subordinate not to let her guard down. Eleanor thought Pharma had handled the situation better and wished she had learned more from him. Recognizing that she did not have special powers like him, she tried to close the subject, but her assistant disagreed, explaining that while Pharma was more accurate, Eleanor inspected the shipments faster. Hearing this, Eleanor thanked her for not being just another useless person. At the institute, the president, who was Bruno, asked Casper about her research. She interrupted him, thinking he was there to cancel her funding. Casper thanked him for tolerating her work for so long and said he would accept the forced retirement. But Bruno stopped her and explained that he actually had an important task for her. When she heard that she might have the chance to save the world, she was shocked, but Bruno calmly handed her a note with instructions to extract a medicinal substance from a microorganism. When she asked who had written it, Bruno replied that it was confidential and only wanted to know if she was capable of completing the task. Luckily, Casper revealed that he had had a sample of that microorganism in his lab for years and showed Bruno the sample that he thought was as useless as herself. Bruno then announced that all resources would be directed towards producing a new medicine with her in charge, and she promised to do her best. In Estac, Pharma explained to the mayor that they would not be able to save some critically ill patients, but the mayor still thanked Pharma for keeping the deaths to a minimum. Pharma added that in order to ensure everyone's safety, the residents would need to cooperate and remain quarantined inside the ice wall for 2 weeks. Before leaving, he asked that no one touch animals under any circumstances. He also said goodbye to the priest and flew away on his wand. Soon after, Pharma spotted a fire in the distance and went down to investigate, finding the priests burning a cart. The captured merchants initially refused to cooperate, but Pharma warned them that the Black Death was on its way and insisted that they tell the truth. They confessed that they had 4 carts, one of which was carrying squirrels. They confirmed that the squirrels had been brought from the island that had been decimated by the epidemic, which indicated that the merchants themselves were responsible for spreading the plague. They also admitted that they were accompanied by 24 workers and 5 holy knights, which aroused suspicion. The priests questioned why they were accompanied by nobles. With this information, Pharma concluded that the Holy Knights had intentionally forced the epidemic into the Empire. He also remembered that the Empress's infection had been considered a deliberate act, which indicated that there was a mastermind behind it all. The merchants began to demand that they be treated as if they were in their right. The priest wanted to punish them severely, but Pharma said that he would deal with them regardless of their sins. Meanwhile, Bruno informed the Empress of the outbreak, saying that the escaped crew members would probably reach the capital in a day or 2. She ordered the ministers to tighten security at the gates, even though she could cancel the fare. The next day, Lot sold masks to every merchant he could find, using his charm. Pierre received new samples at the gate to inspect, and one of them contained the Black Death bacteria. Soon after, an attack began outside the gate, and it had to be closed immediately. The Holy Knights destroyed the gate and attacked the guards. Despite the danger, Pierre rushed to check that the medicines in the camp were protected. There, he saw the knights bringing a cage full of white squirrels, which they released into the capital. They hurled them using wind powers. Upon seeing the squirrels, Pierre understood the danger and ordered the guards to sound the alarm to warn that something serious had occurred. With the ringing of the bell, it was reported in the royal hall that Holy Knights from Netherland had invaded the city. When asked how many there were and the answer was 5, the Empress sat down, wondering why they had not yet been stopped. Bruno suggested that they were there to spread the plague. The Empress did not understand why Netherland would risk an old alliance with such a small attack, especially considering that the country's leader had recently died, which ruled out a national action. Bruno argued that someone with advanced knowledge of medicine was behind the action and suggested that the person responsible could be a brilliant pharmacist who had been expelled from the kingdom for performing human experiments considered heretical. This man had been captured by the inquisitors, had his divine powers sealed, and was reduced to the condition of a commoner. Bruno revealed Camus's name to the Empress, regretting not having eliminated him sooner, even though he knew his intentions. Meanwhile, the knights protected themselves with a wall of ice to avoid the fire attacks and looked for a gap to counterattack the guards. Before they could escape, Salomon appeared and immobilized the knights, using his divine authority to remove their powers, as he considered them unworthy. At the same time, Lot, terrified, wanted to help, but Cedric managed to calm her down. Pharma arrived and climbed the bell tower to assess the extent of the infection with her divine eye. She saw the white squirrels flying freely to spread the disease. Upon descending, she found Bruno and together they went to the place where a captured knight was being interrogated. The prisoner stated that he did not know what the Black Death was, and that he was only following orders, claiming that Camus was holding the population hostage and could kill thousands with a single command. He declared that Camus was possessed by an evil spirit. When Bruno appeared, the knight died. While the bodies were being burned, Pharma was thinking about producing more medicines when she noticed a sinister presence above her pharmacy. Lot went to the place, since the alarms had stopped, but when she arrived, they started ringing again. Cedric let her in and realized that the doors were not locked. Lot had already gone upstairs and felt something strange, looked around and was startled when Cedric entered. She sighed in relief, but it was close because Camus appeared and stabbed Cedric before advancing towards her. Pharma and Bruno rushed to the scene and found Lot and Cedric injured. Bruno attacked to get Camus' attention, but his ice spells had no effect. Camus revealed his hideous face and began to fight. Pharma could not identify the poison used, so she had to guess. Bruno had all his spells blocked and Camus attacked him with his evil powers. Pharma realized that the poison was aconite, but soon identified that it was a compound with multiple poisons. By the time he recognized the second component, Bruno was already being brutally defeated. Camus then took out a vial of a dangerous chemical and began to lecture him about how only the strong should survive. Before he could use the product, Pharma eliminated him. Camus became enraged and attacked Pharma, who responded with a direct blow to the face. Camus tried to convince Pharma to join him in a genocide, but Pharma refused and delivered another direct blow. He then attacked with a punch that knocked him away and, before he could get up, used his wand to exorcise the evil spirit that had taken over him, visible in the rainbow light that appeared in the sky. Salomon saw the light and recognized that it symbolized the purification of any disease present in the air and on the earth. Lot and Cedric regained consciousness, and she embraced him from behind. After the battle, they treated the few infected, while Eleanor managed to stop an outbreak at the port. Pharma had the medicine distributed to everyone as a precaution, but Varen refused to accept it from Pierre, although he secretly gave it to his wife, just out of pride. 2 months later, the Empress officially declared the end of the Black Death pandemic, which meant that the parallel world pharmacy was free to reopen. The first customers were Old Jean, Bishop Salomon, and several others, and that concludes the first part of this story. Leave a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more videos, and see you soon.